the Learning and Development Podcast, presented by 360 Learning. Hello, listener and viewer, and welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast. I'm David James, and today I'm speaking with Nick Jones about the 2026 Blue Eskimo Work and Salary Report, which revealed some fascinating insights into the L&D jobs market. So, Nick, welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So let's start simply. What's going on, Nick? What's going on in the L&D jobs market right now?
Well, that's the number one question that I'm every single day, David, as you probably might imagine, being a recruiter. And it's probably been the number one question for the last 18 months. And we've been doing this 23, nearly 24 years. And people are particularly interested in what's happening with the job market because it has changed. And it's changed quite substantially. There's been some real challenges, right? Both in the UK and Europe, in the US, there's a lot of parallels across those markets that we see anecdotally, just talking to learning leaders and learning professionals pretty much all every day. So what's happening is, I feel, we've had some turmoil. And I think it really stems back to post-pandemic, the kind of hybrid working arrangements and the rush to digital learning and lots of consumption of content and assets. A spike in budgets at that point, and we've seen this in surveys over the years, those budgets being then potentially spent on technology, which was pre-ChatGPT. But then we start to see AI, when budgets have already been allocated, sometimes on long license agreements. And, learning and development is one of the areas, along with marketing and comms and perhaps a couple others, PR, where AI really has had a kind of immediate impact, positive or negative, right? But it's had an impact. So that kind of brings us past 2023 and into what is really the last 18 months, 2 years, 18 months leading up to when this survey was completed, which was in November of 25, and is really covering the previous 12 months. And what we've seen, predominantly in the UK, we're UK based, is a reduction in budget. So projects being put on hold, budget being reduced, and a natural reaction to perhaps overinflated learning teams. And so what we've seen is redundancy, in all honesty, and it's come from two angles, which I'm sure we're going to unpack a little in this conversation today. So we've seen, personal turmoil as far as redundancies and real change is concerned. And we've also seen technological change at the same time. Does that all resonate with you, David?
Yeah, it really does. I think that what I take from that, Nick, is that it's complex. It's complex, and there are many dynamics in there. A little bit about where we've been, where we've just arrived from, and then I don't know, maybe a bit of correction within that as well. I mean, the reason that you're asked that question, I'm sure, a lot, Nick, is because of all those green banners on LinkedIn. It just seems unlike any other time that we've been in learning and development. I know that social media, for good or ill, is never the most reliable barometer, but it just seems to be that's the signal that's coming through as much as anything else at the moment, which is probably where that question emanates from, perhaps from a place of anxiety and fear.
100%. And you said we haven't seen it. We have seen it, as recruiters, we've seen it. 2008, the great financial crash, GFC, and 2020, for different reasons with different outcomes. So 2020, pandemic, we saw not necessarily mass redundancy, but the fear was definitely there. And 2008, we did see, we saw some really, really challenging times for, again, complex reasons, macroeconomic reasons. And the macroeconomics aren't great either. I personally feel, and this is anecdotal, but it is backed up by, I guess, intelligence, ground intelligence, is that AI is a complex beast because it is affecting learning and development. The tool the speed, the creativity, the assets that can be created. There's an immediate kind of we could save some money here, right? If we deploy these tools effectively. And there's some really great research, Don Taylor's research, Gates research, some great US research on how AI is being utilized in L&D. But I'm not sure that the challenge has really been AI in L&D. I think it's more AI in the roles that L&D serves. And so I think maybe the inertia, the rollback, the lack of moving forward with L&D projects really has been a bigger picture reaction to what's happening in the CTO suite and how AI is going to be implemented, affecting all these other jobs. That's just my take on it. But I think it's reasonably well backed up with some of the conversations we have, right?
Yeah, that's right. And there's so much that that we'll come back to, including AI, Nick, which of course is a very unique beast. But you mentioned this is a UK report, but I wonder if we can zoom out and look at some of perhaps the anecdata that you have with regard to the rest of the world, because you mentioned about the macroeconomics, and there aren't many parts of the world that seem insulated from any of that right now.
Yeah.
But what's your sense of what the L&D market looks and feels like around the world right now?
I think that, the report itself, and the report is based on a survey that we do every year. We've done for, I think, 15 or 16 years. And it's predominant because we're UK, aimed at people within our network, essentially. However, that also includes a lot of US and EU respondents. And so we shouldn't pretend that it's a fully global data set, but it is reflected. And as part of the research that we do when we produce the report, we look at other evidence that we can see in other data sets from around the world. And I can also speak anecdotally about the conversations that we have, which include a lot of US counterparts, particularly. It's a very deep relationship between US multinationals and UK multinationals, often investing in one another. And there are common themes: budget caution, skills gaps, internal mobility. These are, and I guess, proving results, so proving ROI. And I don't think that's a UK issue. I think that's probably a global issue. The US tends to always feel a little bit stronger. Overall training expenditure seems to consistently have been higher, but we've definitely seen a big impact, particularly in learning design and instructional design, and whatever that actually looks like in today's world, that being affected quite significantly. We look at things like, the workplace learning report from LinkedIn, and there are a lot of parallels that we can agree with from the conversations that we. And I think, just generally across markets, the macroeconomic conditions affect all aspects of business, and L&D's even less than immune. It's probably always one of the first to be looked at as a potential nice to have rather than a need.
And which reminds me of back in the repercussions, the immediate aftermath of the 2008 crash. I joined Disney in 2006. And I remember all of that was happening. It must have been towards the end of the year of 2008 or beginning of 2009. And I was chatting with somebody from marketing, and the person said to me, "Isn't it funny?" Immediately, Nick thought what he said wasn't funny. So he said, "Isn't it funny how the first things to go when this stuff happens is L&D and marketing?" And I remember looking and thinking, "Oh my goodness, like it's good to see you too." But it always struck me that there and then, and we'll go on. I know that you're really keen that this conversation isn't just a dampener kind of pessimistic view of what's going on in the world right now, because there are things that you outline in the report that are big opportunities for learning and development, and we will come to that. But we do need to let's linger just a little bit further on something that you've alluded to already, because one of the headline parts of the report is that it seems that redundancies have doubled to 22% in the last year, and I wonder what's driving that, and is that all that it seems?
Okay, so I should caveat and explain some of the nuance around. Fundamentally, redundancies, they're through the roof. There's no question about that. You mentioned the green banners earlier. we all know if you're in learning and development that there's something has been happening. I should position this carefully. 22% redundancy doesn't mean 22% of jobs have been made redundant. It means that 22% of respondents at that moment in time had experienced redundancy or some other mechanism for leaving their job without necessarily wanting it. And there are different mechanisms for that. And within a period, and that period, a year. So it was really a snapshot of a moment in time around, I would say, August of 2025. And that's kind of peak horror show. So in the sense that the rollback on spending, the inertia in the UK, we've had all kinds of political challenges. We've had global economic challenges. The US is the same. We've got AI. We've got all manner of things that can affect business confidence. And so often, even if it's not through direct redundancy, enforced redundancy, the opportunity has been presented to people to leave their roles. And now that means that 22% of experience, but then quite a lot of experience going and getting another role quite quickly, or it actually, and that hasn't expanded dramatically. But there is a proportion that have found it extremely difficult, far more difficult than they anticipated, or than we anticipated. Time back from a redundancy situation, or even a voluntary redundancy situation, is just longer, harder, and there's been some changes in technology, things like ATS, the application of AI in the hiring process. All of these things combined show what sounds like a very bleak picture, and it is. There's no, or was, because things are definitely improving. But at that moment in time, I think that's probably truly reflective of what had happened, with the one caveat that if you're responding to a survey from a recruiter in the learning industry, you're more likely to be someone that's experienced this, right? So I should caveat we are recruiters, so we're much more likely to have people that are in our network that have maybe had a negative experience. Does that sound? I mean, it's in a headline. Was that a shocking number to you, David? Was that something that surprised you?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of people who would read that, you're looking for it to either validate or challenge what you see on social media, which looks like a tsunami of the green banners.
Yeah.
Which seemed like the story of our time, but that makes total sense there, Nick. That 22% of respondents, and it tells a part of that story, and I suppose that's why the nuance is so important. That again, the value of podcasts and the opportunity to speak about these reports, because as Laura Overton will tell us, who's been a guest on this podcast many times, is the data doesn't speak for itself. So trying to get through the story and the real life examples is of huge benefit. And so in that regard, Nick, I wonder, you mentioned instructional design earlier. I wonder, are there any particular roles that seem to be affected more than others in terms of those redundancies or rejigging or reshaping of L&D functions?
I think it's probably there's a story in the data and there's a story in the responses, but I think it's probably almost easy to explain this through anecdotes, because these are just a kind of culmination of real conversations that we have all day, every day. We all know learning professionals, right? We can read between the lines. What we've seen is we have seen almost a hard stop at the beginning of 2025 on learning design related roles. Now, that doesn't mean that they were cut back dramatically. It just means that they weren't newly created positions coming through at the level that one would expect, certainly the level that we've seen for the preceding few years. That, in my mind, is definitely because of AI tools, just the fact that the role itself has changed and evolved and is continuing to change and evolve. And I think so the idea of going and hiring more and more resource into that type of role when technology was moving so fast was probably not the right move anyway. We're starting to rebalance it, which is interesting. But the real area that surprised me, and in some respects is not a huge surprise, is it's more strategic roles. It's more strategic learning and development roles. And the inference and reading between the lines is that it tends to be the higher salaried roles that have been the most affected. And that makes sense because I think the real driver here is a macroeconomic driver. And we're all lines on a P&L somewhere, David, right? Some people have said that to me many times, and it's very true. And so whether it was redundancy or whether it was voluntary opportunities to present to people, it obviously makes sense that more strategic roles would be looked at. It's also interesting that those are starting to come back through again now. They will be, so far, the suggestion is that they will be a little different than they were before, a little bit less business as usual. But that's where I think that's the story of what's happened. Pressure at the learning design end, a kind of depletion in demand driven by technology, and more strategic resources and costly resources have been looked at simply through the economic lens, the P&L lens. Let's cut costs. And companies have done that across all functions, but learning and development is always one that's looked at along with marketing, comms, and many others. And we made many of the same people, and it's often the case. It's a 4 or 5 year cycle. I don't know many L&D people that haven't experienced some level of movement, including redundancy. And I think it just happened that more people than normal did last year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And looking at this perhaps with an optimistic slant, then, if you're saying that there's some kind of recovery going on at the strategic level, what that says to me, Nick, and again, looking back to previous recoveries as well, is that you can eliminate the roles, but the need for the roles don't go away. And so it's almost as if you rationalize in order to maintain the expected and requested version of learning and development. It's almost batten down the hatches and deliver. But as soon as it's head up and there's actual growth required, or now is the time we have to really invest in our people. And I don't mean just the rhetoric, the actual deliver a better deal for them. It requires a strategic lens, because if L&D only did what stakeholders asked of them, that role would be very small and very lacking in any impact. But it requires that strategic lens, and the both the application of that lens and the action as a result of that, which is turning capability lag or stagnant careers into growth and opportunity. That requires the learning and development person.
Definitely. And the one area that we've been saying this for years, I mean, literally in sessions that we run as recruiters, but the thing that the I suppose skill set, the one skill that is perhaps the most in demand that always has been really is it's sales skills, it's marketing skills, it's stakeholder engagement skills, it's consulting skills that it's hard. Really selling what L&D does, building relationships, having value and being visible to the business. And that's something that I think it's an absolute requirement now. It really does need that kind of mindset, that performance consulting piece, precision learning based on factual data that you can only get by going and asking the right people. And that's not all traditional L&D roles typically, but it's for sure I think businesses want now, because if they've perhaps let maybe too many resources go, or perhaps they're under-resourced in L&D, then they need to bring L&D back because they've realised there's an issue, or enliven it because there's an issue, and they want it to deliver, and they'll probably measure it in the same way that they do in other functions. And so, getting out into the business and really showing value is what organisations expect. I think now they always have done. That's not to say that hasn't been the case. It definitely has been, but I think now it's probably even more a kind of core competence for L&D.
But do you know what? That throws up an interesting discussion point there, Nick, because what organizations and their job descriptions say they want and what they actually expect are sometimes very different things, because what you've described is very much a strategic learning and development role, challenging stakeholders, selling the benefits of having a progressive and impactful learning and development function, and then amplifying the successes and all of that stuff. In fact, is quite a lot of stuff that learning and development find uncomfortable. And the good news is, Nick, is that I'm writing the book on that at the moment to make that accessible. So hopefully that will go down, and that will help later down the line. But let's go back to that, like the job description. And I've had these, recruiters saying to me, "I'll send over the job description. I'll give you a warning. It's a 1990s L&D job description, but they want a 21st century L&D function. So don't look too much at the detail. They want to change." And I wonder whether that's what you're seeing as well, that contradiction, the paradox of what's being asked for and what's actually needed.
Yes, in one respect, 100%. Because actually, if you think about it, you're not going to see if you see a 1990s job description now, then all that tells me is that someone can't use ChatGPT, right? Because it shouldn't. If it's that bad, then, you've got to think, well, but that's perhaps technologically, not quite where they need to be organization. So I think what we're seeing is job specs that are written by AI. Why wouldn't they be? And then you'll see, we want absolutely everything, every skill, every type of experience wrapped up into a single package. And we also don't want to pay anything for it or very little for it. That's, generally what you'll see. But in most instances, when it comes to rehiring or reshaping a strategic learning role, and that could be even just it could be an L&D manager or an L&D BP, but still perceived as strategic enough to make a difference. Businesses need L&D to be out there within the organization making a difference. And so those consultative skills and sales skills, questioning skills, they're fundamental. Even if they can't articulate that in the job description, that's what they want.
Yeah. Another headline stat that jumps out of the report is that many L&D professionals are ill prepared for their own job searches. What do you mean by this?
So there's a number of different factors to job searching. The bulk of jobs that people find, and this is generally across all of our surveys, they come from recruiters, but not the biggest percentage. I'd love it if it was the biggest percentage, right? But I'm a recruiter. The biggest percentage typically would be from network. Then you've got things like LinkedIn, and you've got job boards, and you've got recruiters. I think there is a rebalancing. Applying for a job in today's market is very different to even 18 months or 2 years ago. Here, you're making direct applications. So the idea that you can go to a LinkedIn job, make an application, a one touch, one press, and go application, and that's going to be read by a human, first of all. And if it is a human, that they're going to understand what an L&D professional does. That's naive. It takes a different strategy. And the way that we write our own CVs requires a different strategy, because there are algorithms involved, there are keywords involved, there are ways in which an applicant tracking system will operate that you kind of need to understand. And often, L&D professionals aren't necessarily the greatest at positioning themselves on LinkedIn. They're just generally. And so, for example, if you have a LinkedIn profile and it's just got your jobs that you've done, 5-6 jobs for the same organization, you've got the job titles, but you've got detail, you won't be found by recruiters, because at the back end of LinkedIn is algorithmic assistance for recruiters who are using keywords to find individuals. And if you've not wedded yourself to that game, then you're just not going to be visible. You're not giving yourself enough of a chance. And I think the challenge is, or has been, we've worked extensively on this over the last couple of years with candidates, is that if you haven't needed to put your CV together, you've never really needed to apply for jobs previously, because you've always found moving from one to another has been straightforward. in the market that we experienced in 2025, that was just okay. So I think that was shocking and challenging to people and made them have to think their own job search strategy. And in some respects, it's really good. It's cathartic to actually rewrite your CV from scratch. Really think about what have you done and delivered, rather than just add on the last 6 months or the last 2 years onto the CV that you've had since 2020 or 2018. And so I think people are starting to realize that the game is a little bit more challenging, should we say, than in previous years. We should, perhaps put a little bit more effort into how we present and position ourselves, brand ourselves.
And that speaks to me, Nick, as if looking for a job isn't something that you do when you need it. Then maintaining a digital presence, especially on LinkedIn, and a professional presence. So that's why I'm not bringing in Instagram. Perhaps that does have play a part, but you used the word naive earlier. If anybody applying for a role today doesn't think that someone is going to be taking a look at their LinkedIn profile to see what they can find out about them, and perhaps even acknowledging something that L&D don't, I think, truly appreciate, is that their marketability for jobs, a lot of it is going to come down to network, and it's not just number of people; it's going to be the right people. So what I'm trying to get to here is that LinkedIn is more than just a profile picture and an updated job summary. Yeah. It is about connection. It's about sharing value. It's about emanating a bit more about who you are and what you've got to contribute. As you said, there's more going on in the back end. I only see it from the front end, but I can certainly that's what I'd be looking for. And then so I'd love to get your perspective on that, Nick. And then there was one more thing I'd add to that as well, because I think there's a lot of contention around it. Around should you update and or send a unique CV for every role that you're applying for? Because I think that there's certainly a misunderstanding in the market about that. All right, what would you say about those two things?
The LinkedIn side of things, I feel very passionately about the fact that everybody should have some semblance of personal brand, and this was the case 10 years. And I don't mean posting regularly about you've had for dinner or whatever it might be. Some people post on a very regular basis on LinkedIn. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But doing nothing on LinkedIn will result in nothing other than someone that you already know falling over your profile. But if you're contributing to the industry or the sector that you're in as a human, then you probably want to be on LinkedIn. Maybe looking at what other people are doing, adding your voice. Perhaps you can help them. Perhaps you can peer review something that they're doing or that they've asked about. And that is way more valuable than even, 10 posts about whatever particular day it is of the calendar month that's being celebrated, or whatever other stuff that people do from a social media perspective. I would 100% think of your LinkedIn as an extension of your CV. You need a really good summary that explains who you are and something that's going to attract potentially an employer or someone for business opportunities, or just someone that would actually want to network with you. And an explainer of what it is that you do is critical, because one of the best ways to get hired is to be approached by recruiters. And the way that you'll get approached by recruiters, if they're not in your network, is that they will find you on searches that they will do in LinkedIn Recruiter, or something called RPS, LinkedIn Recruiter, back-end paid for system that LinkedIn operate. Talent acquisition is exactly the same tool. And it's really driven by keywords. It's driven by experience, length of experience. It's driven by qualifications, locality, and education, languages. Really, all of that information. Certifications is another really important aspect of LinkedIn. A good example is that on LinkedIn profiles, we all used to put have our skills listed. David, you could have said, I have brilliant project management skills. And Nick Jones, could have come along and said, David has amazing project management skills, but I don't know whether you've got good project management skills. You could have said anything you wanted. It doesn't really have any meaning. What does have meaning is certification. And you can append certifications that you've done with LinkedIn Learning, other providers. That is searchable, that's visible. And so even if it's just periodically adding, developing iterations to your LinkedIn profile, it will have value. It's also the very first thing any potential hiring managers going to look at. So I think for anyone looking to be recruited, definitely your LinkedIn profile is really important. And LinkedIn presence can just add value and that is seen, it's visible. In terms of making those applications, I think if the role is a role that you, at an individual level, feel that you are uniquely well positioned for, then I would absolutely do that. But I hear very loudly and clearly, particularly when it's direct applications through roles that have been advertised, the amount of people that will make an application that they've spent a lot of time formulating and then don't actually even hear anything back. I've not heard that as much as I have in the last 18 months. And the reason for that is volume. It's volume. It shouldn't happen. It does happen. But I think it's uniquely frustrating. It's upsetting. It can affect someone's self-belief. But if you're right for the role and you've positioned yourself effectively, then there's probably something else going on if you're not being taken forward. So I would encourage it, but I also am very conscious of the fact that it can be a hard struggle to do that every time.
Yeah, sound words, Nick. Right, I'm gonna see if I can go deep here, Nick, because clearly you're a connected man. So I'd love to know, what's the advice you seem to be giving most these days to L&D professionals?
I think we've just covered some of it. I mean, at a base level, there's advice around positioning and personal branding. We've touched on some. That's really important because so many people, even if they think that they've done, been reasonably visible or thought about their personal brand or their CV, really when it comes down to it, probably haven't. And what I always say to people, go and get a cup of tea. If you're English, British, we'll drink tea or coffee or, whatever your tip is. Print off your CV and read it start to finish, and then define whether that is reflective of A, what you've achieved, and B, what you want to do next. And I can't tell you the amount of times where people went back up and then laughing, saying that was horrible because it was not what I thought. But so much is potentially missing. Look at what you're producing through the lens of someone who doesn't know, who's looking to hire, and it's almost guaranteed you're going to make some changes to how you position yourself. And I do think as well, we touched on consulting skills. I like to call them sales skills. I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been, do you know Sharon Tip?
Oh, I heard the name, yeah.
So I can't, this was years ago, but I remember her speaking about needing to, N&D professionals needing to be at the water cooler, representing the fact that you should be out there having conversations. And I hear that a lot from hiring managers and businesses who feel that there's sometimes a bit of a disconnect. They want to know what the business needs in terms of learning, and some of the best learning professionals, they're well networked within their own organization. They're out there, and sometimes using things like LinkedIn from a personal branding perspective have the exact same effect internally. You can tell what the learning function is doing through personal brand, team brand, and Marcom's tools internally. And I guess it has the same net effect, right? So I think those areas are that's probably the core of advice that we give for people that are actively looking for work and opportunities.
Yeah, nice, Nick. And it reminds me of I get sent plenty of CVs where people seeking some guidance, and the one thing that stands out more than any other is that their profile or their bio at the top doesn't reflect the job that they're going for, and you almost see it in the first sentence that they'll say, look, I want to get an L&D manager job or L&D, a head of L&D job, and it says, I am a reliable learning and development professional. And you're looking and thinking, you're speaking to me like you're an administrator. You look like you are the safest Excel steward that I could hire. It's almost as if you've got to believe, you've got to fully understand what the job description is. And then you've got to step into that and say, I can do that, and then sell that to me. And it goes back to what you were saying before about sitting down with your cup of tea and having a read and seeing whether that still reflects where you are, because that top part, I can guarantee if when that touches human eyes, there'll be many a time when that bio isn't actually completed because the person didn't say that they could be trusted in that role.
Yeah. And to be honest, in many instances, CVs, certainly in the UK, resumes in the States, right? CVs in the UK.
Good point.
I would say they're in some respects, they're more important than ever, but they're also less important than ever, because the reality is, if someone likes what they're seeing, they're not necessarily going to read it top to bottom. It's possibly been that the individual has been selected because AI selected them off a batch of 10. It goes in front of a hiring manager. This document is a sales tool. It's selling you as an individual to a hiring manager. If you've used a recruiter, if there's been a recruiter's intermediary, they're not selling recruiters, but recruiters will rely on the profile, the synopsis they put together, and the CVs. And if you're directly applying yourself and it's just your CV that you're putting in, and to your point, the first thing the first narrative is a kind of catch-all, generally doesn't really say anything, it's going to go on the B pile, or they're going to go to the LinkedIn profile to get a better insight. And if they go to the LinkedIn profile and it's more of the same, or there's nothing there, that's probably one of the reasons why maybe someone might find themselves not even in the game to be considered. So there's all of that kind of advice is practical advice. There's a lot of it. You can get this advice. You can get a real understanding. AI can really help with that. If you want to know how the algorithm in LinkedIn works, well, ask ChatGPT or Claude. And if you really want an insight or a strategy, it'll do that for you. That's one of the amazing things about AI. But at a general level, I think for us, L&D professionals are often really great orators and great delivery. They can put together a fantastic learning experience, but can they translate that back to selling themselves? And that's often where it's maybe a little bit more challenging.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Nick. As we look to wrap things up, I know I mentioned earlier on that you were keen that this conversation wasn't too heavy, and that it reflected perhaps the stories behind the headline data. And I think you've done that brilliantly, especially that this second half of the conversation, which has been about what the listener can practically do to put themselves in the frame if they are. What is it? The report said nearly half of professionals are considering a move into the market right now. So what do you hope the listener takes away from this then, Nick?
I think realism, I think it's we try to be, look, we're recruiters. We do the work and salary survey, and we do a salary benchmark as well. And we put all of that information out. And some years, it's really all about how amazing L&D is and how many L&D professionals are super happy in their jobs. And that's great. That's great. But when that's not the case, I think it's important to just be honest about it and be clear about it. It's no point kind of putting a sheen on things that doesn't exist. What I would say is, anecdotally, I don't think November 26th when we do the survey for 27. I don't think it's going to be the same. I don't think anything dramatic material is going to change. I don't think budgets are suddenly going to explode and we're going to have, fantastic times like the Roaring Twenties. But I think that it's almost like you can't hold back on projects and expenditure for too long. Businesses still need to deliver. They need to deliver the promises that they've made on AI, not least anything else. And we're definitely starting to see the market normalize a little bit, not fully, not anywhere near where we would normally expect it, but there's definitely a little bit more than green shoots. And I think there's a lot less people that are being made redundant. I think that stopped. So I think that stopped last year. It was just a shocking amount. And it was very upsetting for often people that we know. It's difficult conversations. So I would say, just being realistic and honest with ourselves about the fact that L&D, when things are tough, L&D gets looked at, right? And I think we've probably been, looked at for maybe a little longer than we would normally in a macroeconomic curve. So hopefully we're on the way out of that and things are going to get a little bit easier.
Nice. We all hope that, Nick. This has been hugely insightful. Nick, if people want to connect with you or follow you, how best can they do so?
They can go to blueeskimo.com. We've got resources on there. We've got some resources. We created a resource that might be useful for people, which is really just around personal branding and positioning CVs, etc. So there's some of that details on their survey detail. If anyone wants to take a look at that, they can find our contact details on there.
Brilliant. I'll put some links in the show notes as well. Nick, this has been brilliant. Again, as I said, all's left for me to say is thank you very much for being a guest on the Learning and Development Podcast.
Thank you, David.